All right, looks like we should probably get started here. So thank you everybody for joining and welcome to our Hyperconvergence Customer Roundtable. Joining us today is Soumitra Ghosh, VP of Infrastructure and Data Services, and we have Larry Chapman, Senior IT Manager. Now, I would like to hand off here to each of these gentlemen in turn and have them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about what those titles actually mean and what they do for their day-to-day jobs. Soumitra?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. So I'm Soumitra Ghosh, and I'm the VP of Infrastructure at Driscoll. Driscoll is a berry company, and we are present across the world. So the global infrastructure is managing all the global IT infrastructure across the various countries where we are and the data centers. So we are in over 80 locations across the world. So I make sure all connectivity works and all the backend servers, all the applications that are related to that, managing them, designing them, is my responsibility. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. I'm Larry Chapman. I'm the Senior Manager at TruSource Labs. We're more of an SMB environment. I come from a very large background in infrastructure. So what we do is we're a IT services call center company. We do Apple Help Desk and things. And so my responsibility is to build the infrastructure for multiple locations, international locations, and have all of our tools and support environments work between the various sites. Most of my newer roles is taking over DevOps because that allows me to automate so many of the processes that are manually done in a typical environment. And so that's kind of what I do.
Well, both of those actually sound pretty interesting to me, having myself been a small business sysadmin. I'm honestly kind of interested how you've managed to integrate hyperconvergence for both of those. I'm going to move on here to our first round of questions. So let's talk about your existing storage, the stuff that you had before you went into hyperconvergence. What did your storage landscape look like? I'm going to start off here with Larry.
Okay, so when I first got to the company, it was about a little over a year ago, they were in hyper-growth mode. They went from $1 million in year one to $30 million in year three. And so their infrastructure consisted of a single flat network that had grown from the beginning. They had one huge HP server, had about 40 or 50 virtual machines on there, using the storage on the box. They had no shared storage infrastructure and just a single point of failure with the one server. And so that's kind of what I walked into at the beginning.
So in Driscoll's, we have traditional storage, just things like NetApp, EqualLogic, and in some cases, in some of the remote site locations, we did not have any storage because one of the reasons for using Maxta in the first case was that the remote locations were quite big, but they were not big enough to be cost effective for a SAN. So how do we manage a highly available environment in that area? So we had just basic single servers. So we went from that to something which is more robust and does not have issues, and we can run VMware in that environment.
Interesting. So on the one hand, sort of a bit more of a hodgepodge that, you had to handle some hyper growth, and then on the other, collection of some pretty traditional sounding mainstream arrays. So what were the pain points that you were seeing with your traditional storage? I know that, Soumitra, you had said price was a factor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll give you two different use cases, for two different scenarios. One is just smaller remote offices where where you need infrastructure, but the cost of establishing a SAN for a more highly available local infrastructure in remote locations where latency to a data center matters, like to even provide simple file print, all these services, with a constant uptime and smaller applications that a remote satellite office needs, or a regional headquarter needs. So there the cost is definitely an important. So high availability with cost, that was one of the big things, right? Also, that's one aspect of it, and the second aspect is, we also had a lot of growth in storage where you need a lot of quick building of infrastructure for dev and other things. And in that kind of environment, we found like a maxed out type solution, much more easier to build new environments. The snapshots and other capabilities that were available with it were much faster than even the traditional VMware type things that were used over just the regular storage arrays.
Well, I have to say I definitely understand that. My own experience is when you have multiple sites, especially if the sites are smaller, it's not exactly that you can serve all of that storage out centrally because internet access is not cheap. So, Larry, what were the pain points that you were experiencing with the storage that you discovered when you first came in?
Well, when I first got here, there's a single point of failure, no shared storage, no way to replicate data between the data centers. So I was tasked to go ahead and build design a system that can be rapidly deployed over and over. As we grow into different markets, we open up another center. How can I do that cost effectively with the ever shrinking IT budgets these days? I was tasked with putting a solution together. So a typical solution that I would have done, even 5 years ago, was to find some shared storage, get another server, use vMotion and some of the VMware tools to add a little bit of high availability to the cluster. But the cost of buying a shared storage box for at least even my small environment is still going to cost me $80,000 to $100,000. And then since we don't have a large IT staff, I would have to probably hire a consultant to come in and calculate all the LUNs and the timing to get it tuned. And that'll only last as long as the data sets that are there remain the same. And we're constantly adding different virtual machines almost on a daily basis to run reports and do things. So the pain point for me, I guess, was the cost of going with a traditional storage model. And then having to be able to replicate it over and over again were some of my major pain points with going with a traditional solution.
Fair enough. So you've both mentioned cost a lot. What was your trigger for hyperconvergence? Was it the cost alone? Were there other things that drove you to looking at hyperconvergence versus some of the other options that were on the market at the time?
so for me, the other options that were on the table were still kind of standard. I mean, I still had to have some sort of shared storage for infrastructure. I needed, I looked at vSAN and some other solutions that were out there, but to build a true solution that has redundancy and failover capabilities, I didn't see anything out there cost-wise that was going to lead me to a solution that I could replicate over and over again. And so I had been doing some market research on hyper-converged infrastructure. I think at the time I was doing my research, there was about 25 to 30% of the industry were already doing something, probably mostly in their test labs, but they had started looking into that. And so I started researching several of those companies. And again, cost was a major concern for us, and I believe there's a major cost difference between some of the solutions out there.
Fair enough. So Soumitra, Larry says, in addition to cost, the reproducibility of this storage solution seems to be a big thing for him. Was this also the case with you?
I think that a couple of other things that I would say to that, reproducibility is one, but I would also say that, the ability to use any hardware, software, well, not software, but hardware, any hardware, and use existing investments was one of the bigger factors there too, because it was not at least from the Maxta-based solution. It is not an appliance that I need to buy again, right? I could reuse some of the infrastructure that I had. It fits in easily into our network. So those were additionally important aspects of this.
Okay, fair enough. So, Soumitra, what else did you look at? I mean, in addition to hyperconvergence, you clearly had quite the collection of solutions already at your fingertips. What else was on the table?
So I am perhaps one of the early users of Maxta. So, I looked at, this is at least 4 years ago, if not, maybe around that time. So I did look at, other solutions like Nutanix, like vSAN, as has been mentioned, traditional storage, just, more scripting. But the easiest fit for me was Maxta because of its ability, because as I said in the last answer, one of the big reasons was I could use my existing storage, use some additional, say SSD type devices, and gain significant throughput and improve my high availability. The holy grail of any infrastructure management, or remote management is to have the ability to manage an environment remotely and also still be available, highly available. And to do that using existing infrastructure seemed like the right choice to me.
Fair enough. So Larry, when you went about building your solutions, it sounds like you came from a much smaller set and were going through a lot of growth. So I'm imagining that you did a lot of sites that were just completely clean. What were you looking at and considering for storage in addition to hyperconvergence?
Well, for me, I was looking for something that had great support. I was looking for something that repairs itself so I can schedule maintenance instead of 3 o'clock in the morning, everybody rushing to their computer, somebody's on site. We have a coordinator that's coordinating all the stuff because we're a 24-hour shop here and over in Ireland. And so I needed to be able to build something that was stable, that had good reliability, and I could schedule maintenance for upgrading whatever software, hardware that I had to configure at the time. I also wanted any solution that I put in to be hardware agnostic. For me, servers are just a commodity now. You can buy basically the same server from 4 or 5 different companies. Maybe it's the end of their fiscal year, maybe it's the end of a quarter, but you have the leverage again when negotiating price for these commodity servers. And so I did not want to get locked into a solution like a traditional storage thing. I mean, you're locked into that from start to finish, and if you upgrade, you have to buy a new box, you have to change drives, you have to recalculate everything. So being able to have a solution that's truly hardware agnostic was really big for me, because I have stamped out 3 of these sites. I've got a few more on the board. So I think that was my big driver in wanting to go with a solution that was different than traditional storage. Interesting.
The discussion that you had there about maintenance really speaks a lot to my own experience. I certainly remember a lot of late nights. Can you elaborate a little bit on how you find that maintenance differs with Maxta?
Sure. So yeah, I came from a service provider type background where I'm spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year building out infrastructure, and so buying a solution that everything that you add in that environment, it's a box, and so with a box you have the initial cost of ownership, then you have whatever the maintenance service contract you add that on, and then you have software licensing, and so anytime you put a new box in your network, you have those associated costs with it. And so when I was looking at these different solutions, I looked at SimpliVity, I looked at Nutanix, and so SimpliVity seemed like it was going to be a perfect solution. It was hardware agnostic. I read lots of reviews and talked to customers that had it, but that was at the exact same time that they were bought by HP. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I felt over the course of time they would definitely tune it so that it worked with HP servers, or it was more efficient, or there was some reason that I would be locked into a specific hardware vendor. And so maintenance in my past life has been one of the biggest headaches. You're working on a project, you're trying to make one change at a time in your network, and when you're right in the middle of it, something breaks. You have some sort of hardware fault or some cable that goes out, and you spend 3 nights trying to troubleshoot it and get everything back online. And so I was looking at hardware, hyperconverged infrastructure, or hardware and software really, and just the software version of hyperconverged. And I think all of them had advantages and disadvantages. I would say that the disadvantage for software only, it seemed like it was really hard to get set up and installed, and I would have to have consultants, and there'd be that built-in cost that I have to do every time I built a solution. And with the hardware, if you outgrow your hardware, then you have to, you have this upgrade tax, I think is probably the term I would use, to where you had to buy a new box that was bigger, and then what do you do with a smaller box? Constantly with your data sets changing on what type of files you're storing and archiving, and the data that you're using immediately every day. So all of those things were concerns right from the beginning, and so that's why I picked 3 different vendors to evaluate before making the dive into hyper-converged infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think listening to that conversation, I'd like to add one more thing here, which kind of bolsters that fact is, with remote locations or with many different locations, you cannot always choose the type of vendor either from a hardware type, like provider type. We have environments in Morocco where maybe HP doesn't get supported, but Dell gets supported, or Supermicro is not supported. So, having the ability to choose the type of hardware that you want and have quick replacement of parts for that is significant. Well, if you go into an appliance-based model, then you have to look at the appliance to be supported in that region, and that becomes a challenge. And one other thing that I found during my initial evaluation that I still consider an issue is in an appliance-based model, it's slightly stair-step, even though they call it building blocks, but you still have to buy, and there is a significant cost up to buy the next one versus, in a Maxstar type environment, you have the ability to scale up as you need.
Yes, absolutely. I find both of those items hit a little bit close to home. In my experience, one of the reasons why I personally embraced hyperconvergence was exactly that I could use pretty much whatever hardware that the local suppliers could provide for my different customers, and I could do things like go out and say, for example, buy a big Dell R730XD, which can handle 24 different drives, but only started out with 4 drives. And then as the customer needs it, start adding more and more and more storage. And that both the scale up and the scale out, have been a big driver for me personally. So, what you're saying here definitely hits home, both of you. The next question is, how did you evaluate the different solutions that you have, and did you have any specific criteria in mind when you went into your storage evaluation? I'm going to start with you, Soumitra.
So, as I said, I did this evaluation a while back, and generally this is my process of evaluation of any software or hardware or a solution. Is first look at literature, and things are much more available now, right? Look online. You don't only have to go to Gartner. I mean, Maxstar at that time was a small player or a startup at that time. But look at the landscape around you, see what is available. Evaluate it against the basic requirements criteria that I had, and we have listed many of the things that why we finally chose this. One is one as I just said is the variety of infrastructure that I have in my environment, and the support capabilities of those environments in different countries, right, requires me to be highly flexible of the type of product that I use. So the software only solution was a big plus point for me, because then I could use underlying any hardware. How I scale out, in some locations maybe I need a just simple 3-node cluster. In other locations I need a larger cluster. As you said, what is the size of disks that I need? Do I go to like a Supermicro type solution where I can add a lot of disks in the environment, a lot of SSDs in the environment? What type of SSDs? SSDs have also come a long way since I started this evaluation. What types of SSDs I was able to support. Then the features like snapshot, replication, speed of snapshot. Everybody knows VMware snapshots are hard. I was looking, obviously, like we talked about, lights out environment, which is, have the applications running. You don't have, in a highly dispersed environment, you don't have people everywhere. So you need support. You need it to run all the time. So HA is, by design, but it also helps. And then And then, the other aspects of this is just the software features like, snapshot, replication, cloning, easy to build those, very low footprint of these things rather than, how VMware was treating them, which is much, so not using VMware snapshots, for instance. So those are the main criteria.
Fair enough. Larry, you sounded like you had a bit of a formal POC process going on. Did you have a formal set of criteria that you were using?
Sure. So, for me, the initial cost of ownership, how much am I going to have to pay just to get the solution in, and then what is the total cost of ownership with all the licensing and maintenance, and and then the final part is what is the upgrade cost? What type of engineering resources we're going to be required to support a solution, how to scale the solution, both compute and storage. And one of my big things, I needed it to be centrally managed. I need to manage this from one location and not have engineering staff at each site that we end up building. And then what types of storage were available for me to use? Spinning drives, SSDs, there's flash memory. There's all kinds of things out there. And so I wanted to be able to have the most flexibility in that area. Those were the things that I was looking at. And of course, failover mode. Those were the criteria that I set when I started inviting vendors to come pitch it to me.
And one thing I would like to add, if it made it sound like, I didn't do a POC, I did a long POC with this, with a couple of the products. And in the end, based on all the other criteria that we had, we found Maxta to be the right one. And we actually did run it in our environment for at least a couple of months.
Okay.
So let me just go ahead and I'd like to discuss the three different companies that I evaluated and what I kind of saw in the end of the evaluation. All those criteria went into it. The HP thing I kind of explained, but I did have Nutanix come in. And, the first thing that I realized was they were going to give me a quote that was way overpriced. But then, they say they give you a 75% discount or something like that. And those are the sales games that people like me absolutely hate. I just want to know what it costs. And so when it all came down to it, the initial cost of ownership for the Nutanix solution came in around $150,000. And it was a small solution. It wasn't a large solution. But then all the cost associated with it afterwards and all the training that I'd have to get, the Maxta solution came in under that. As a matter of fact, I built a brand new site, a 450-seat center for less than what the entire Nutanix, just the box itself, cost. And so that includes all the servers, every network switch that I bought, all the fiber that I bought. Everything came out to about $25,000 less than what it cost just for the initial cost of ownership of the Nutanix box. And so I'd also said that I was a little bit timid of the software installation and whether I was going to have consultants come in. When I did the POC with Maxta, they gave me a kind of a checklist, what IP ranges do you want to use, what are your servers. It was really kind of simple form. Well, when I actually purchased the Maxta, I installed it myself, and the pre-install checklist, they had just created this menu-driven thing, which is basically the exact same questions on IP address ranges and things that you're going to be using. And I clicked next, and in about 30 minutes after I entered all the data, I had a hyperconverged system that I was running in my network. And so the ease of installing the software, those were all put to bed by choosing the Maxta solution. And all of my criteria for the POC, the initial cost of ownership, the total cost of ownership, engineering resources, I don't have to have any specialists, storage specialists on staff. As a matter of fact, I've kind of, besides having a good network engineering team, I am really focused on DevOps for automating many of the processes that we do manually right now. And that includes provisioning new virtual machines or whatever the process is. I can spend a lot more time on automating those. We actually did have a hiccup in our system. After we had our first Maxta cluster up and running, we experienced a parity error on some of our new Dell servers, and it happened to just one, but it could have happened to any of them at any point. After talking to Dell, it ended up being a firmware thing, and that fixed the problem. But when our system, we had a whole box failed on a parity error, and it was probably 2 hours later when I ended up going through my email, I found an alert that said that something was down. But we didn't experience any downtime. Everything failed over. The high availability worked. So I didn't even know it was down. That's how good the failover capability is and the high availability feature, how it works inside the Maxta solution. So if I have to have more storage, I can just replace the drives with bigger drives. If I need more compute, I can just add another server to the cluster, and then I have more compute. So all of the criteria that I was looking at, I was very pleased with the Maxta solution because it addressed every single one of the points I was doing my evaluation based on.
Interesting. So it sounds like one of the big reasons for going with the software hyperconvergence over the hardware hyperconvergence for you was that it's both scale up and scale out, which speaks again to something that Soumitra was talking about earlier. So Soumitra, what about with you? Was that the real big driver between the appliance model and the software model for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have put it in good phrases. Yes, that's exactly it. So one of them is that I can choose to upgrade when I want. It's not a step upgrade. It's not like, even though we talk about forklift, upgrade meaning changing things, but it's almost like adding another whole appliance that creates that's a jump. That's not a smooth curve, right? Number one. So exactly as you said, scale up, scale out, and the other thing, as I said, also with an appliance base versus my solutions or my infrastructure purview, I have places very different countries who have different support requirements, and in many cases appliances are not supported in those kinds of areas, right? So they will always follow hardware manufacturers or server manufacturers are supported in across many countries and many regions. And so I was able to so that was another big criteria. I would like to say one more thing, why did we ultimately choose, maybe it's not why, but over the years having worked with, Maxta, one thing that worked for me was I was able to influence, and they were willing to listen as a company to building out features, tweaking the software to customer requirements. And I feel that it has both helped me and made the software better over time.
good project managers and good product managers always make the difference for everything. So what advice, ultimately, having now used Maxta, having used hyperconvergence, having gone through all of these tests and evaluated different storage, what advice do you have for others who are considering hyperconvergence as the solution to their problems?
Okay, so for me, the advice is so for hyperconverged infrastructure, it is really simple. You can get an inexpensive solution out there. There's lots of software vendors, lots of appliance vendors. Some of the bigger solutions of VxRail and vSAN and all that stuff is, to me, it just turns into a nightmare because you constantly have people out there. Evaluate and look at solutions based on your criteria. It is. I have not had any issues with speed on the network. I haven't had any issues with, and then that's going to vary depending on your different workloads that you're running. And so that's a consideration, is what type of workload you're going to be using it for, and maybe you adjust how many SSDs you have in your environment versus spinning disk. So yeah, I mean, just build you a good list of requirements, and then go out and evaluate. For us, it was hands down, Maxta was the best solution for us. And it ended up being the cheapest solution as well. And they have great support. Their product managers are incredible. And so I have a great relationship with them, and that's worth a lot of money to me. So that's my advice.
Fair enough. Soumitra?
Yeah, I think similarly, obviously you have to choose what fits your requirements. But the next, having spent many years in this line of business, I would say one of my key criteria whenever I work with any vendor is also how open and flexible they are in working with you, working with you and doing the right thing for you, and being less sales oriented and looking at solutions. And in that regard, also I found Maxta, the team of Maxta, to be very helpful. And as I discussed, we work through problems to come up with solutions that the whole community can use, right? So I think that those are things that that any company can benefit from, and most solutions differentiate each other by the kind of people whom you are working with.
All right, fair enough. So we're going to switch over to Q&A here, and we have a few questions queued up already. Before we do, one of the things that I wanted to mention, since it wasn't brought up in some of my own experiences with hyperconvergence, that there is a great variability in performance that you can get when you play with the software-based hyperconvergence. And one of the things that recently has come up in my testing, what happens when you start cramming a bunch of NVMe disks into your solutions. Now, you absolutely can create a monstrous hyperconverged cluster with millions of IOPS in a relatively short period of time. But what's very interesting is that when you're considering the replication traffic on them, you should remember that it is only your writes that end up getting replicated across the network. If you have very read-intensive workloads, hyperconvergence can end up being absolutely amazing for any of your workloads because they can pull off the SSDs, pull off the NVMe that happens to be in the individual nodes without necessarily overly burdening your network. And this leads into the first question that we have, which I would like to pass to Larry, which was, does hyperconvergence use the same network for replication traffic and for VM traffic? And if it does, have you noticed any issues?
Yeah, sure. So we built ours to use the same network. I mean, we have high availability links, and we have, Maxta has its own storage network, but all of our access to the network, we just build different vNICs and VMware, and it's using the same infrastructure. I have seen absolutely no problems. I mean, we're so much faster than just coming from spinning disk environment. Yeah, I have not seen any, and I plot the flows and I do all the research on them, but we haven't experienced any problems at all running it on the same network. And we're connected. Everything's 10G in our environment, so 10 gig connections. Just 1G to all the access layer, but all internal. It's 10 gig links.
Okay. My next question here is for Soumitra, and that is, what kind of drives do you run on your clusters, and what has the performance been for the different types of workloads that you're running?
So we generally do a mix of SSDs and SSDs primarily for the storage environment, and obviously it's a combination. But overall, we have run SQL servers for smaller applications and for larger applications, and we have in general never seen any based on the cost per, the size of the environment versus a larger storage environment. I would say the performance has been, we have not seen any degradation of performance because of Maxta configuration.
Okay, I'm going to send the next one here to Larry. Now, how did the clusters handle failure events, and did you do any testing as part of your POC related to failures?
Yeah, so we did a lot of testing for failover conditions, degraded conditions, locked up VMs, and how we could restore those, clone a snapshot and get it up and running. And so, throughout all the testing, the Maxta performed flawlessly. And then, as I spoke earlier, we had an actual outage where a server just stopped on a dime and had a parity error, and it was totally offline and not working at all. And so, of course, we have high availability turned on, and I have 3 copies of each one of the VMs, so it can pop up on any machine at a given instant, and that worked perfectly. We didn't experience anything. One of the things we did was we also have a virtual VMware vCenter server, which again we have 3 copies of. So it really doesn't. You don't have any kind of performance hit or anything when you do maintenance because we've sized our cluster properly so that we can run even in a non-degraded mode on just 2 of the servers. So we did lots of failures in our testing phase.
Okay. So I've got another question here. What's more of a statement than a question, but I'm going to actually just throw this one at Soumitra because it was something that he had previously touched on. Traditional storage has a shelf life, 3 years, 5 years, depends on what your support agreements with them are. There's, the old meme of the forklift upgrade, having to throw away your SAN when the support upgrade expires, at some point you have to replace the hardware that's going into Maxta as well. Do you see that as being different from the forklift upgrades that you get with traditional storage? How does the refresh cycle affect you?
So refresh, if you're saying compare refresh cycles between storage and Maxta or traditional storage and Maxta, then it's a night and day kind of scenario, right? I think we touched upon this during our conversation a few times, but as I said, in Maxta we've had this environment for a while. So we have made changes to the environment where we have got new systems, put it into the cluster, and boom, we have more storage or more server capacity, compute capacity. While with storage, it's all about, what type of disks you have. The disk are 7K, now I have to change it, the hardware changes. It is truly a forklift upgrade after 2, 3, 4 years because, the CPUs don't keep up. The disks don't keep up. The SSD support is not there. While with Maxta, most of these, are server-based environments, and I will go back to your term of scale up and scale out. Both of them can happen very easily. One, just add disks to your server if you need to, make them faster disks if you need to, add a faster server and a faster disks or different types of disks that you want to. So all of these add significantly. And one thing we haven't touched a lot about here is storage does require a storage administrator, right? You have to be in a traditional LUN, volume, all these base systems. You need to have a storage administrator who's focused on storage. With Maxta, you don't need another storage administrator. You do not need another NetApp person who knows NetApp or EMC or whatever else. You can work with your system admins who have good knowledge of VMware, which every system admin does now.
Fair enough. So our next question is one I'm actually going to have all three of us answer, and it's about the compression and deduplication. Maxta does storage efficiency, and so the question is, do we see quote-unquote good storage savings from these technologies? Well, I guess good is always relative, would be how I would answer this. I work a lot with photographers, with videographers, people that generate a lot of data that isn't particularly compressible or deduplicatable. Now, if I were to look at my traditional workloads, where I have, for example, an Exchange server, or I have my SQL databases, and your ordinary workloads, they deduplicate pretty well. I think on one of my Maxta clusters, I managed to get deduplication ratios somewhere, 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 when I was running nothing but a bunch of LAMP servers on there. But if I'm, for example, running one of my virtualized file servers and it's got 12 terabytes or 15 terabytes worth of images on it, the data efficiency ratios are not that great. I'm only seeing somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.4 to 1.5 to 1. So in my experience, it really depends on what you're trying to get data efficiency on. But again, I'm going to pass this around and see what everybody else is seeing in terms of the data efficiency that they're getting out of their solutions. So, Larry, what about you?
Okay, so I'm not running any sort of deduplication. That's not really an issue on our end, but I think we have about 15 terabytes worth of storage at each of our locations. And the inline compression that we're seeing Maxta perform is about 2.5. I think at one of the sites where we have a little bit more mixed traffic, it's about 1.85, and so it's fast. Gives us more storage space. But again, with this solution, if I needed more storage, I'd just plop in a couple different drives, and it wouldn't be an issue. So, but we are seeing the inline duplication of a factor of 2 or a little bit over that.
Okay. And Soumitra?
I would say those are all. I mean, I don't have too much to add. I think that is in that two range is what we are seeing too in most cases. But obviously, database and those kind of file system type stuff is higher. But I don't have immediately all the numbers in front of me.
Okay. Another question that's come through here is, does Maxta use data locality when running VMs? In other words, do the VM IOs come from the host it's running on, or does it traverse the Maxta network?
Primarily it is local, right? So.
Okay. Our next one here, and I'm going to throw this at Larry, is what workloads do you run on your clusters, and do you do mixed workloads on your Maxta clusters?
Yeah, so we have our master database, our CRM system. We run our PBX runs on a virtual machine. All of our QA tools, our software-defined networking solution is running on a VM there. Standard things like inventory, all of our asset management, the Windows, Active Directory, DHCP, DNS, network policy server. So pretty much all of our critical workloads are running on the Maxta cluster. And I mean, it performs well. The thing that Maxta allows you to do is allows you to set a page size when you create a new VM, along with how many copies of it you want. And so for us, that's great, because if we're running a database, we'll set it to 4K page size. If we're running Windows operating system, we'll set it to 32K page size, which helps a lot with the read-write things and making it much more efficient on our disk I/O. So we run a mixed workload, and it runs flawlessly. Well, we don't have any issues with I/O lag or anything.
Okay, so Soumitra, what do you use for backup in DR, and how does hyperconvergence make a difference in your backup and DR planning versus the traditional storage approach?
Well, backup and DR is really a planning approach. Is more I would say that whether it is traditional storage or Maxta, you would have to plan this out based on your recovery point objective and recovery time objective. The advantage of the local HA is obviously more with a Maxta environment than a traditional environment, traditional storage environment. But from a backup and DR perspective, I would say if you need to plan for a remote offsite location, then you have to plan the replication or an appliance of that nature at another location where you do that replication. And you could use the Maxta software to do it, or you could use the VMware software to do it. So you have to set it up based on your recovery point objective, recovery time objective. You have to set it up based on where you want to have the backup and DR facility, whether it is in a geographically separate environment or within your company some other location. So these are things that are bigger considerations than the tool itself. I would say from an HA perspective, Maxta versus a traditional environment, allows a difference. So is more different than similar.
Yeah, I can go ahead and add something to that. So I use Veeam backup and replication, and so traditionally I was using Veeam, and I was storing it in Backblaze or someplace, and of course that's still an hour to download the file and get the VM back up and running. And so what I've done is I've replicated VMs between our sites, and so we have a fast site-to-site VPN set up between all of them. And so if something happened and let's say I lost a cluster, it was 2 failures and I couldn't recover from it and I get it back online, I always have a set of data available to me that I can have up and running in 5 minutes, let's say. But we still use, for disaster recovery, we still store snapshots in the cloud. But with all the clones and, the snapshots, I have them run every 4 hours, I think. And so I always have data that's no longer than 4 hours old that I can bring back up online. But I think I could set that to every 15 minutes if I wanted to. You have to decide on how much you want to store. But I use it with VM backup and replication, and it works really good.
All right. Well, this leads us actually directly into the last question of the event here, which is, what are the snapshotting and cloning speeds like on Maxta? Soumitra had previously said that, we all know that snapshotting on VMware is a bit rough. So, Larry, I'm going to leave this last one with you here since you were already on the topic.
Yeah, so again, everybody in your engineering team needs to be familiar with VMware and how to use it, how to roll it out. But snapshotting is one of the points of contention when using VMware. It takes a long time. When you restore, it doesn't always come back on, and you find there's some setting that you had wrong. With Maxta, it constantly snapshots. Again, you create a snapshot policy, and you tell it how often you want to do it, how many copies you want to keep, and it happens automatically in the background. The VM doesn't go offline. Everything continues to run as normal. Whereas if I'm snapshotting the PBX server or something, our phones will stop working for sometimes up to 5 minutes while it's doing the snapshot. And so with a hyperconverged infrastructure using Maxta, we don't see any degradation in the performance of the VM while the snapshots are taking place. And if you want to bring up your snapshot on a different server because you're doing maintenance or something like that, then you can just clone a snapshot. It'll pop right up, and in 15 seconds, I think, or even less, it's up and running and in an on state. So it increases the performance of the traditional VMware solution quite a bit.
Yeah, this is one area, even though this was close to Larry, I would just say that the speeds are amazing. There's no comparison between the two. You will save a lot of your hassle using snapshots from Maxta than from VMware.
Fair enough. So we're going to wrap this up, and I would like to say thank you to everybody involved. Do either of you have any parting thoughts to leave with our attendees?
You can go first.
No, I'm good. I think we covered all the major topics that we wanted to cover.
Yeah, I would highly recommend getting a POC with Maxta. They can set it up so you can virtually log into it and test it. I think we had them bring out a little 3-node cluster, which they will do if you're trying to test with some of your hardware. Which we did also. They sent us hard drives, some of the SSD drives and things, so we didn't have to put out any money for that. And one of the other things that I'm really excited about, we're building our dev environment now. Maxta now supports KVM for Red Hat. So instead of the real flashy type of interface that you get with VMware. It looks, it's a really nice HTML5 interface, and all the tools are there to move from a VMware environment to the Red Hat environment. So I'm really excited about that.
All right.
That's all. Okay.
Thank you very much, and I hope everybody has an excellent day.